Protests and the president. There was more violence in U.S. cities over the weekend. How the White House is responding. Fight for the unborn. A report says House Democrats are targeting a pro-life proposal. We have reaction. Rebuilding effort. How Catholic groups in Louisiana are helping in the wake of a deadly hurricane. And carrying our cross. Pope Francis reminds the faithful why struggles in life are not a stumbling block. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, August 31st, 2020. Good evening and thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm Eric Rosales. Tracy Sable is off tonight. Well, we just have 64 days until the presidential election. Violence on American streets is taking center stage. President Donald Trump and Joe Biden both point to problems in cities like Kenosha, Wisconsin and Portland, Oregon. Let's check in with White House correspondent Owen Jensen with the latest. Owen.
Eric, the election countdown is on and the race is tightening, and tonight here at the White House, President Trump is blaming Democrats for the violence in the streets, and in turn, Democrats are blaming the president. Ongoing violence in American cities like Portland, Oregon draws a response from the White House.
Washington, D.C., New York, Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, Kenosha. All of these cities are Democrat-run. All of these cities have experienced anarchy, violence, and destruction in recent days.
On Twitter this morning, President Donald Trump writing, "Portland is a mess, and it has been for many years. If this joke of a mayor doesn't clean it up, we will go in and do it for them." In that city, which has seen months of protests, President Trump's supporters and counter-protesters collide over the weekend, and a supporter of the Patriot Prayer Group is fatally shot on the streets.
It's you who have created the hate and the division.
Portland's mayor points to the president.
Your campaign of fear is as anti-democratic as anything you've done to create hate and vitriol in our beautiful country.
But the president says the radical left mayors and governors of cities where this crazy violence is taking place have lost control of their movement. And at a campaign event in Pittsburgh, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden spoke.
Fires are burning and we have a president who fans the flames rather than fighting the flames. But we must not burn. We have to build.
Invite federal law enforcement in. We stand ready. Do not tolerate anarchy, violence, and destruction. Rioting is not right. Secure your streets.
Tomorrow, President Trump heads to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where there's been deadly violence after a police-involved shooting. Now, the Democratic governor of that state does not want the president to come, but others welcome the president. Eric?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting tonight. Thank you, Owen. Well, the director of national intelligence says that he will brief Congress on election security in writing.
It looks like a pre-cover-up. It looks like they don't want to share the information. They're covering up information that may or may not. I don't know what they've got or not, or what they have or don't have. But it looks like they're trying to keep this information from the public so that when everybody goes to vote on November 3rd, they won't know to the extent to which they've been attempted to be influenced by the Russians or some other country.
The administration disagrees and says this change is to protect the intelligence community.
The last time they gave briefings, a few members went out and talked to the press and disclosed information that they shouldn't have disclosed. And so he's going to make sure that there's the proper tools for their oversight and make sure that they contain it in a way that does not jeopardize sources and methods for the intel that we gather.
Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said Sunday that he is not leaking any information to the media, but added he cannot speak for other members of the committee. The Los Angeles Times reports House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Catholic, will not oppose a push by House Democrats to repeal the pro-life Hyde Amendment.
Let me be clear. We will fight to remove the Hyde Amendment.
The push by House Democrats is part of the Democratic Party's 2020 platform. The long-standing Hyde Amendment prevents taxpayer funding for abortions. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden said in March that he opposes Hyde because it prevents abortion access for minorities. However, several pro-life organizations claims the opposite happens. Joining me now by Skype to talk more about the push to repeal the Hyde Amendment is Mallory Quigley, Vice President of Communications for the pro-life Susan B. Anthony list. Mallory, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric.
Well, what do you think of the timing of this move by Democrats to do away with the Hyde Amendment?
I think that it's an incredibly reckless and disrespectful push to be urging taxpayer funding of abortion for women in the Medicaid system who we know are disproportionately women of color, and to say that we want to provide abortion for you and your children rather than common sense, compassionate health care. It's a terrible message to be sending during this time when we're reflecting on the value of life in our country.
And we certainly know that this measure has been significant, a piece of pro-life legislation. How many lives has it saved? Do we know?
Yeah, that's right. Research done through our education arm, the Charlotte Lozier Institute, found that more than 2.4 million lives have been saved by the Hyde Amendment. That's babies whose mothers were in the Medicaid system who had their first birthday instead of an abortion. And this is an incredibly significant number. More than 2.4 million people walking the earth spared by the Hyde Amendment thanks to this common sense and what used to be bipartisan and is still very popular, especially among rank and file Democrats, policy.
Right. We've heard from opponents like Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden say that the Hyde Amendment is discriminatory in nature and that it adversely affects women of color. What's your response to that?
Good afternoon.
Yeah, my response is just that this is it's discriminatory to push abortion on women of color. Black women already account for a terribly disproportionate number of women undergoing abortions in this country. And what more racist eugenicist message could you be sending to women of color that you'd rather pay for them to have an abortion, an elective abortion, than to take care of them and their families? And this is something that the pro-life movement has been doing for decades, is reaching out to women in distress, in facing unexpected pregnancies, and providing resources through the pregnancy center movement across the country, men and women who are helping people that are facing unplanned pregnancies, and providing them all sorts of material resources as well as spiritual and common sense support.
And we've seen Joe Biden reverse his position on the Hyde Amendment, supporting it for decades, and then in this election cycle coming out against it. What do you think?
Yeah.
Why at this time now is he coming out against it?
Well, Joe Biden flip-flopping on the Hyde Amendment, this is part of the extreme shift that we've seen the Democratic Party go to the hard left on abortion. Because, like I said earlier, the Hyde Amendment for a long time was sacred ground. This was an area where Democrats were allowed to vote with their conscience, but the party is now entirely controlled by Planned Parenthood. Joe Biden reversing his position cemented his pro-abortion policies, and of course choosing someone like Senator Harris to be his vice presidential running mate, who she's opposed not only the Hyde Amendment, but a common sense ban on abortion after 5 months, protections for babies born alive. The Democratic Party, unfortunately, is wholly owned subsidiary of Planned Parenthood and the abortion lobby. And Hillary Clinton was the first national candidate to champion taking away the Hyde Amendment in 2016. That was a big point of contrast between her and then candidate Trump. And it was a big reason why I think we saw pro-life voters and people who just don't want their taxpayer dollars going to fund abortion. They chose Donald Trump. So this is also a political vulnerability for Joe Biden.
Well, Mallory, thank you so much for joining us. Mallory Quigley, Vice President of Communications of the Susan B. Anthony list. Thank you.
Thank you.
China is defending the concentration camps in Xinjiang, and Hong Kong's new security law brushes off human rights concerns. China's foreign minister is in France trying to revive trade. Relations have been strained due to the coronavirus. Yang Yi repeated his claim that the Uyghur Muslims were released, but families report that their relatives are still being held against their will. In the capital, Belarus, protests continue for the third consecutive week against the contested presidential election earlier this month. Protesters rallied outside the presidential palace of Alexander Lukashenko on his 66th birthday. They say he stole the election. He's refusing to rerun the vote, which the U.S. and European Union say was not free or fair. Dozens of journalists and over 260 protesters have been detained in the last few days. Lebanon's incoming prime minister tours Beirut and gets a closer look at the neighborhoods destroyed in the catastrophic explosion earlier this month. Mustafa Abid spoke with people of Beirut, but some protested his visit. The first ever direct commercial passenger flight between Israel and the UAE landed in Abu Dhabi today. It carried a high-ranking American and Israeli delegation.
I want to thank and congratulate the Crown Prince, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, my friend, on his leadership and courage. Last year he celebrated the Year of Tolerance and welcomed Pope Francis to the Gulf, and this year he welcomes Israel.
The plane had the word peace painted in Arabic, English, and Hebrew. The flight flew through Saudi airspace and passed over the capital of Riyadh, another historic first for an Israeli flight. In the Netherlands, the trial resumes for 3 Russians and a Ukrainian accused of being involved in shooting down a Malaysia Flight 17. The lawyers for the families of the victims say that they want damages for the injustice they suffered. All 298 passengers died when a Russian missile blew up the plane in July of 2014. The Orthodox Church started their new year tomorrow and commemorating how God created the world. The season of creation begins tomorrow with the World Day of Prayer for Creation. It's part of a month-long series of events, and it comes after we approach the 5th anniversary of the letter Pope Francis wrote wanting everyone to care for the planet. Joining me now with more insight is Andrea Gagliarducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN. Good to see you, Andrea. Now, where does this tradition come from?
Well, the tradition of the season of creation was established back in 1989 by the Ecumenical Patriarch Dimitrios that proposed to have a season for creation 1 month from the beginning of the Orthodox year to the feast of St. Francis, October 4th, dedicated to the care of creation. This proposal was welcomed by many Christian confessions, including the Catholic Church. So ever since, there are a span of initiatives during this period, and the Catholic Church takes part to these initiatives as well. Obviously, this year is particular for the Catholic Church because it's also the 5th anniversary of the promulgation of the encyclical Laudato Si by Pope Francis that was dedicated to ecology as well. And so that it's included in a series of celebrations that last the whole year.
And speaking of that celebration, what are some of the other events that are included in the season of creation?
Well, Pope Francis tomorrow will deliver a message, as usual, and then there are messages from most of the Christian dioceses, Catholic dioceses all over the world, and initiatives in dioceses all over the world. Especially if you check the Vatican website, there is a website just for the season of creation. Well, there are a lot of webinars and a series of focus on the application of the integral ecology. It's a particular branch of the ecology that is based on human being. Because, ecology for the Catholic social teaching is something that goes from, the care for the human being to the care of the environment. It's not detached.
Exactly. And remind us exactly what that Laudato Si says and why Pope Francis wrote it.
Well, Pope Francis identified in the ecological quest, in the ecological issue, one of the core issues of the current world. Laudato Si was published back in 2015. It's not just an encyclical on the care for our common home, as the title says, but it's mostly an encyclical on social teaching of the Church. It goes from the no to the abortion to the care of the common home, which means also all the ecological issues that are important now, and it served as the guidelines for the Holy See diplomacy in these 5 years. The Holy See took part to many ecological meetings. It signed the Paris Agreement for the reduction of the pollution all over the world. So it was quite important, and it was quite read all over the world.
Very important there. And Andrea, thank you so much for joining us again. Andrea, a Vatican analyst for EWTN News. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, an update on the path of destruction left by Hurricane Laura in Louisiana. So far, 18 deaths in Texas and Louisiana have been attributed to Hurricane Laura. Over the weekend, President Trump visited some of the damaged areas. Correspondent Mark Irons joins us now with more on the relief effort. Mark.
Eric, parts of coastal Texas and Louisiana are now on a rough road to recovery. I'm told the relief effort is challenging on top of battling a pandemic, but this is when the church steps in. Hurricane Laura blasted the coast with 150-mile-per-hour winds. Electrical outages cut hundreds of thousands of people from power and are expected to last weeks. Lake Charles, Louisiana, among the hardest hit areas. President Trump visited the disaster zone Saturday and spoke about the federal response.
FEMA has delivered 2.6 million liters of water and 1.4 million meals, and that's a lot of meals.
The Catholic Church is also leading a recovery effort.
We are used to responding.
Ben Broussard with Catholic Charities of Acadiana says for this part of coastal Louisiana, it's not a matter of if a hurricane will hit, but when.
We jumped into motion, not only responding to those who have been affected in our diocese, but also coordinating a response for those who need it the most in Lake Charles.
Catholic Charities is sending out debris removal teams and tarping roofs before real renovation efforts can begin. Among those leading a hand, Catholic nuns.
Our thoughts always go toward the poor, toward the most vulnerable, those who lack the natural family supports and safety nets to be able to cope with a disaster like this.
Catholic author and speaker Katie Prejean McGrady and her family evacuated their home in Lake Charles last week. She tells me the damage in her community is horrific.
I kind of keep trying to remind myself, like, this is hard, but we can do hard things. And we can do the hard things through the grace of God. We can do the hard things because we're not alone. We can do the hard things because, this is when the church is mobilized.
And another example of the church mobilizing, the Knights of Columbus have pledged to donate $150,000 to the Diocese of Lake Charles. Supreme Knight Carl Anderson says this donation is only the first step in our efforts to help with recovery. Eric.
Wonderful story. Thank you so much, Mark. Correspondent Mark Irons reporting. And we also want to thank the Knights of Columbus for its support of EWTN News Nightly. Some sad news to share with you. Legendary Georgetown University basketball coach John Thompson Jr., simply known as Big John, has died at 78. Thompson led Georgetown University, the oldest Catholic and Jesuit institution of higher education in the United States, to a 1984 national championship. During the 1980s, the Hoyas made 3 Final Four appearances and won 7 Big East titles. He even led the 1988 U.S. national team to a bronze medal at the Olympics. A family source says that he was suffering from multiple health challenges. Up next, Pope Francis reminds the faithful our daily burdens are a chance to receive help from God. As the nation continues to battle the coronavirus pandemic, one Catholic priest is sharing his personal story of survival and enduring faith through his bout with COVID-19. Monsignor Charles Pope, the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., recounts his experience in a piece in the National Catholic Register. The headline summing it up this way: "I was hit hard by COVID-19, and I'm still not afraid." Monsignor Charles Pope of the Archdiocese of Washington and host of EWTN's Morning Glory joins me now by Skype. Monsignor, so good to see you and so good to be speaking with you. We've been praying for you. How are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling much, much better. I'm amazed. I went into the Georgetown University Hospital in respiratory failure, and they went right to work. And I was 11 days in the ICU, but I came out good and strong and holding proper oxygen levels and just on the road to recovery, just getting my strength back. So I feel great.
Take us back to that day in July when you first started feeling sick. Physically, what did it feel like?
At first I just had flu-like symptoms, kind of nausea and high fever, 102, almost 103. But at some point, I began to lose my ability to keep my breath. And they told me to check this pulse ox, that little thing you put your finger in, and it had dropped into the low 80s. And they said, "You got to come in right away." And so I was driven right in, got right to the hospital, and they brought me right in the emergency room and put me on oxygen. And then they went to work with a lot of different medicines, remdesivir, a lot of other types of medicines they were giving me. They've gotten pretty good at treating it, frankly, and much better than when we've learned a lot.
Wow, that's wonderful. And you said that your first thoughts were of your flock, and what was going through your mind?
I just kept thinking, priests, of course, don't live solitary lives. We interact with so many people. And I thought to myself, my gosh, I've tested positive. This is going to affect 100, maybe 300. At the end of the day, basically 300 people were told to quarantine and get tested. And that was a major inconvenience, obviously, to a lot of people. And I just felt terrible about that. Of course, I didn't, even though I didn't do it intentionally, it just is what it is today. We got to look out for each other. And so they were asked to quarantine so as to, if they had any contact with it, they wouldn't spread it either. And so I understood why they had to do that, but it was just, I felt awful about that.
Now, how did your faith and prayer sustain you throughout this struggle with COVID-19? And were you battling the virus and also personal attacks you had against you as well, right? Explain that.
Yeah, I had a very bad article written about me in the Washington Post that I think twisted some of the things I've written. I've always said to people, let's not be panicky about this. Let's be prudent. But when they hear don't be afraid, they think I mean go ahead, behave recklessly, don't wear masks. I never said anything like that. And I certainly never said that people who haven't come back to mass by now are lukewarm Catholics. I didn't say that. I don't believe it. I think there are some people, a good number, who probably shouldn't be coming back yet because they're vulnerable.
Well, I'm glad you're setting the record straight, on that.
Yeah, and all I can say is that really broke my heart. I'm lying flat on my back. I can barely talk, and these things are being written about me. But I think we all have times in our life where we have to experience that, and certainly our Lord did. And he told me, look, I went through it too. They distorted my words too. I got you close to me at the cross, and I died of respiratory failure on the cross, said the Lord. But you're not going to die. I need you to finish a few things. And so,
amen
anyway,
to that. Amen to that. To me. Having experienced this now personally, what do you want to tell EWTN viewers out there, what they should know, what they should keep in mind?
Well, I think we should start by saying COVID is a very serious thing. Almost 200,000 people have died. We don't just wave our hand at that as Catholics. But on the other hand, I think that as Catholics, we do need to contribute to the discussion by saying that there's a theology that we have of suffering, there's a theology that we have of death, and there's also a theology we have of learning to trust God. And so we all have prudential decisions to make, as things begin to reopen. We should certainly follow all the civil norms. We should certainly wear masks where required and keep social distancing and just good common sense things. But I hope that we can avoid becoming excessively fearful, because I'm a survivor.
Yes, you are.
I'm in that verified 5% that went into the ICU. Most people don't need hospitalization. About 15% do, but I'm a survivor.
Well, and, we're glad that you're with us, and God bless you, Monsignor Charles Pope of the Archdiocese of Washington and host of EWTN's Morning Glory. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, Pope Francis reminds the faithful, taking up our cross every day is not a stumbling block.
Prendere la croce diventa partecipazione con Cristo alla salvezza del mondo.
At his Sunday talk with the pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says that our daily struggles are a call to rely more on God, knowing He loves us and wants the best for us. Pope Francis also says that we can be reminded of this if we wear a cross, have them around our house, and even our workplaces. Well, we want to thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Eric Rosales. We leave you tonight with a look at the pilgrimage site at Lourdes, France, who are welcoming now visitors once again for the first time since the COVID crisis. Have a good night and God bless.